Jacob didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. As the weight of Emma's confession wrapped itself around his thoughts like a thick fog, he couldn't navigate through, no matter how hard he tried. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall, but inside his chest it felt like a storm was brewing stronger than the one that brought Emma and the twins into his life. And the more he thought about Rose, quiet Rose with the eyes full of questions and that necklace heavy with meaning, the more the gravity of the truth pulled him into deeper contemplation. Not just about the secret itself, but about what it could mean for all of them, for their fragile new normal, for the slow-blooming connection he'd formed with a broken mother and two little girls who had unknowingly filled the emptiness he had tried to keep locked away for years. And as the sky shifted from dark to gray, with the first signs of dawn, he walked into the kitchen to find Emma already there. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders and her wheelchair turned toward the window like she had spent the whole night, staring out into the unknown, her eyes red but dry, her face tired but composed. And when she looked at him, there was no need for small talk. Because they both knew this wasn't just a moment, it was a crossroads. Jacob sat down across from her, his voice low but steady as he said, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but I think Rose deserves to know who she is someday." And Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she clutched the mug in her hands, whispering, "I just don't want to lose her. If he finds out, what if he tries to take her away?" And that fear echoed with such sharpness that it cut through Jacob like glass, because he understood it too well, understood what it meant to lose someone, understood the haunting emptiness that followed. And yet he also knew that hiding from the truth could become its own kind of prison. So he placed a reassuring hand on hers and said gently, "Then don't go to him for money or power. Go to him with honesty, just so he knows. So Rose won't grow up without knowing where she came from." And after a long silence, Emma finally nodded, her lips forming the quietest okay he had ever heard. It took 2 days to draft the letter, and it wasn't dramatic or accusing. Just a plain envelope addressed to Gregory Ainsworth's private legal office, with Emma's handwriting carefully explaining who she was, what had happened, and that she wasn't looking for publicity or compensation, just a single conversation and a paternity test. For closure, for Rose's future, for peace of mind. Then they didn't expect a response. Not from a man like Ainsworth, who reportedly dismissed scandals with the flick of a pen and never let emotion get in the way of business. But 3 days later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Jacob's humble home, and out stepped Gregory Ainsworth himself, taller than photos suggested, dressed in a sharp gray suit, with eyes as calculating as they were cautious, and in his hand was the very letter Emma had sent, creased at the corners like it had been read over and over. Jacob stepped onto the porch as the girls played inside, and Emma wheeled out slowly, her face composed yet pale, her fingers tightly clutching the arms of her wheelchair as Gregory approached, stopping a few feet away before taking a long look at her, then at Jacob, then at the house around them, as if trying to take stock of this entire situation in one deep breath. And then his eyes landed on the doorway where Rose peeked out shyly, her face partially hidden behind a curtain. And the moment he saw her, he froze, his entire expression shifting from stoic to stunned, and the silence stretched thin before he finally said, "She looks just like my mother." And Emma's face crumbled just a bit as she nodded, whispering, "Because she is yours." And Gregory didn't speak for a moment, didn't argue, didn't deny, he just asked softly, "May I speak to her?" And when Rose came out, guided gently by Jacob, she looked up at Gregory with those big, questioning eyes, and he crouched down, meeting her at eye level, and smiled gently, saying, "That pendant you wear, it once belonged to someone very special to me." And Rose smiled nervously, replying, "Mommy said it keeps me safe." And Gregory's eyes welled up for just a moment before he nodded. She was right. The next week was a blur of tests, phone calls, lawyers who were told to stand down, and finally confirmation. Rose was his daughter, a 99.9% match. And the man who once ruled boardrooms with an iron fist now sat in Jacob's living room with a cup of cheap instant coffee in his hand. No entourage, no photographers, no ego, just a grandfather meeting his blood for the first time. And instead of throwing demands or waving papers, he did something unexpected. He asked questions, listened, took slow steps, and when the news eventually broke, it wasn't because of him, it was because someone at the clinic leaked the DNA results. And the media exploded with headlines about the secret daughter of billionaire Ainsworth found living in poverty. And while the world swirled in speculation, Gregory stepped forward with a public statement, one that shocked everyone, declaring, "Yes, Rose is my biological daughter, and I intend to be part of her life. But I also met the man who raised her when I wasn't around, and I won't pretend I can replace that." And then, with the weight of the world watching, he said, "His name is Jacob Hayes, and he's more of a father than most men I've met in my life." And that was the beginning of a strange, beautiful, and awkwardly perfect new chapter. Gregory didn't try to take custody, didn't demand control. Instead, he helped quietly, buying a new house near Jacob's that was fully wheelchair accessible, setting up trust funds for both girls, funding Emma's medical care to the point where she could begin rehabilitation with hopes of regaining partial mobility. And he visited every weekend without fail, not as a CEO, but as a grandfather who brought homemade cookies, magic tricks, and stories about faraway places. Jacob, meanwhile, kept his job at the garage, though he worked fewer hours now, spending more time with the girls, who had completely stolen his heart, and with Emma, who slowly became more than just a guest in his home. She became his morning smile, his midnight conversation, his reason to believe again. And one night, as the crickets sang outside and the warm glow of the living room filled the house with soft light, Emma wheeled herself out to the porch where Jacob sat staring at the stars. And in that quiet night air she said, "I never thought I'd find someone who'd love me broken." And Jacob turned to her, eyes full of warmth, and whispered, "You're not broken. You're the strongest person I know." And they sat in silence, hands entwined, hearts aligned, as the soft laughter of two little girls drifted out from inside the house, a house that had once been filled with silence and ghosts, now alive, with love, laughter, and the kind of joy no amount of money could ever buy. And though the world now knew Rose as the heiress, she never changed, never demanded fancy things, never forgot the man who taught her how to ride a bike, or the mother who sang lullabies from a wheelchair, or the tiny pink room where dreams were reborn. Because for her, the greatest treasure wasn't found in penthouses or bank vaults. It was in the arms of the man who pulled over during a storm and saw a family where others saw burden. A man who didn't just save them, but gave them something even greater, a home, a future, and a love that no fortune could ever replace. The sky was an angry shade of gray as sheets of rain crashed down on the cracked streets of a small, forgotten town tucked between nowhere and nothing. The sound of thunder echoed like distant cannons, and a single truck made its way slowly down the road, its headlights cutting through the storm like a blade. Inside was Jacob Hayes, a man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered but worn down by life, with grease-stained hands and eyes that carried more pain than joy. He had just locked up his mechanic's shop, one of the few places in town still holding on despite the economy crumbling around it. His routine was always the same: close up, grab a cheap dinner, and head back to the quiet house that held both memories and silence. But today wasn't like every other day. Today, as he turned a corner near the old gas station, he saw something that made his foot slam the brake harder than he'd ever hit it on the job. There, barely visible in the downpour, was a woman in a wheelchair, soaked to the bone, struggling to push herself forward through the storm with two tiny girls trailing behind her, holding a trash bag that sagged under the weight of everything they owned. The woman's face was pale, lips trembling from the cold, but her hands refused to give up. The girls looked no older than 6, twins by the look of them, their little shoes waterlogged, their hair matted to their foreheads, eyes wide with fear. Jacob's heart clenched. He'd seen hardship, lived through his own nightmares, but this was something else. He pulled over without thinking, rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, you okay?" The woman froze, unsure whether to trust the stranger. She looked at her girls, then back at him. "We're fine," she called back, though her voice was barely audible over the rain. "You don't look fine," Jacob said, stepping out into the rain, despite the fact he was already soaked from earlier. "Where are you headed?" The woman hesitated, clutching the wheels of her chair like armor. "Anywhere but here." Jacob walked closer slowly, careful not to spook the kids. "Listen, I don't mean any harm. I live just a few blocks from here. You can dry off, eat something warm, just for the night. I got an extra room." The girls looked up at their mother with pleading eyes. They were shivering. The younger-looking twin, Rose, had a cough that sounded deep and unhealthy. The woman, clearly torn between desperation and fear, finally nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "but just for the night." Jacob didn't ask questions. He loaded the trash bag into the truck bed, gently helped the woman into the front seat, lifted the wheelchair in after her, and buckled the girls into the back seat. It was a quiet ride, except for the rain hammering the windshield. The warmth of the truck's heater slowly brought color back into their cheeks. When they arrived at Jacob's modest one-story home, he opened the front door and let them in first. The place wasn't much second-hand furniture, peeling wallpaper, old wooden floors, but it was clean and warm. He handed them towels, let them use the bathroom, and started a pot of soup. "I'm Jacob," he said as he stirred. "Emma," the woman replied, "and these are Lily and Rose." The girls gave shy waves. Jacob smiled. Pretty names. That night, he gave them his daughter's old room. She had passed away years ago, and he had never changed the pink walls or the small bed with stuffed animals still waiting for her return. It had been a graveyard of memories, but now it filled with life again, giggling, little feet running around, bedtime stories being read by a mother who fought sleep just to make her kids smile. Over the next few days, Jacob learned their story. Emma had once had a normal life, a decent job, and a fiancé who promised her forever. But then came the accident. A drunk driver hit her car late one night on her way home from work. She survived, but her legs never moved again. When she came out of the hospital, her fiancé was gone. Her family called her a burden and told her she was on her own. With no job and 2 daughters to care for, she spiraled into poverty. Shelters became her only hope, until even they turned her away for being too much responsibility. She tried staying in abandoned buildings, under bridges, in alleys anywhere, to keep the girls warm. But that storm had been the last straw. She had no strength left, no food, no hope. Jacob didn't tell her about his past right away. He didn't mention the wife who died giving birth to their only daughter, or how cancer took that daughter from him before her 4th birthday. He didn't talk about the loneliness or the nights he drank himself into silence. But something about Emma and her girls made him open up in small ways. He started coming home earlier, fixing the heating, teaching the girls how to fix bicycles, buying little snacks he remembered his daughter used to like. And every night, after the girls had gone to sleep, he and Emma would talk sometimes about life, sometimes about nothing at all. He looked forward to those talks more than anything. One evening, as the girls played with crayons and dolls on the living room floor, Jacob noticed something odd. Rose wore a small silver pendant around her neck. He hadn't seen it before, and the symbol engraved on it caught his eye. It was a stylized A inside a circle, familiar, very familiar. He had seen it years ago on the news, in magazines, even on perfume bottles. It was the logo of Ainsworth International, a global luxury empire spanning fashion, aviation, and technology. "That's a unique necklace," Jacob said casually. Emma's face turned pale. "It's just a trinket," she muttered, but Jacob wasn't convinced. That night, after the girls went to bed, he asked again gently. Emma stared at the pendant in her hands, silent for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I didn't always work as a receptionist. A long time ago, I was a personal assistant to Gregory Ainsworth." Jacob's heart skipped. Gregory Ainsworth was a household name, billionaire, CEO, businessman, media shy, but powerful. Emma continued, her voice shaking. "It was just a job, at first, but he was kind to me. One night, during a business retreat, one thing led to another. I didn't expect it, I didn't plan it. And when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I didn't tell him, I was scared. I thought he'd take the child, or fire me, or both. So I disappeared. I left before he ever knew." Jacob sat silently, trying to absorb what he'd just heard. "So, you're saying one of your daughters, Rose, might be his?" Emma nodded. "I know she is. She looks just like his mother. Same eyes, same nose. I kept the pendant because it was the only thing I had from that life." Jacob was stunned. He stared at the closed bedroom door where Rose slept peacefully, unaware of the legacy running through her veins. "Emma, that's not just a little secret," he said softly. "That's a life-changing one." She looked at him, fear written all over her face. "That's why I never said anything. I didn't want money. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to raise my daughters in peace. But now I don't know what to do." Jacob felt the weight of the moment crush down on him like an avalanche. The little girl he had started to love like a daughter might be the heir to a billion-dollar empire, and the woman he was slowly falling for had been hiding a truth more explosive than anything he could have imagined.